Thank you for joining me for today's Todd Talk. We take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. Another strategy that you can use for differentiating up would be the independent study. An independent study is simply an alternative instructional strategy where students work independently. However, there's more to it than that. So, for example, there has to be a structure to it that you the teacher have kind of set out with the teacher. There needs to be agreements that are made between you, the teacher, and the student. And just because they're working independently doesn't mean that you ignore them. It means that you are still checking in with them periodically and pushing them to that next level should they not be getting there on their own. So, why do we do an independent study in the first place? So, there are a few reasons. So, if you have that student that's done with all of their work, and they get it done early and they don't know what to do now, you can have kind of a running independent study where anytime they finish early, they have something that they can do. An example I have is my Four Corners projects, which you see here. And the Four Corners projects were set up in my room in each of the corners. And when a student finished early, they could go to one of those projects, the high interest projects, and work on those. And they could work on it 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there. They could abandon it for a month and then get back to it. So that was the beauty of the Four Corners projects, is that they could work at them at their own leisure. Some students found them so interesting that they worked with them on their own free time, but that's not necessary. And I never took this as a grade. I always took this as just an opportunity to learn about something. And if students were interested enough, they would do that. A second time of independent study is I already know all of this. So, for example, you're getting ready to do a unit on rocks, and the student clearly knows rocks already. They can tell you what a sedimentary rock is, and metamorphic, and igneous. They can identify different types of rocks. So, the next 2 weeks that you're going to spend teaching about rocks is really going to be repeating information for them because they already have this. So rather than make them sit through 2 weeks of instruction that they already have, create an independent study with this student. And for 2 weeks, they can dig deeper, no pun intended, into rocks and pursue something more about rocks that they didn't know, or pursue something that they are interested in learning about with rocks. And so this is a content tied independent study where it's tied into what they would have been learning. They're just going deeper into it, and they're doing this independent study in lieu of the classwork they would be doing because they already have shown mastery or knowledge that they already know it. The third type of independent study is just a student who loves learning about something. So if you are introducing something and they're like, "Oh, I love this. This is something I've always wanted to learn more about," and you're only going to spend a couple weeks on it and they want to extend that further, then this is the opportunity for them to do an independent study. And in this case, sometimes this is independent in that it's not part of the class. They're doing this on their own free time because they're pursuing a passion. So let's say that students really, I've read an Ernest Hemingway short story and they really love that story and they want to learn more about what Ernest Hemingway has written. Well, then they can simply, you can introduce the idea of reading For Whom the Bell Tolls to them, or Farewell to Arms, and extending that further and learning more about Hemingway and his writings and his style of writing. So this would just be an independent study that pursues a passion that the student has. Any of these are viable independent studies and they can be used in all sorts of different ways. So like I said, one can be long-term, they can be long-term or short-term. So you could just have a day-long independent study. You could have a month-long independent study. It depends on the time that the student has and the time they're willing to put into it, or the time that they're replacing because they're doing something instead of something you were going to do in the classroom. It can be curricular related or it can be special interest. So it could be related to something you're doing in the classroom. It can simply be something that they're interested in learning more about. So pursuing a passion or something that they are curious about. It can be during school. It can be due out of school. So the ones that take place of classwork that you would be doing, they could use that time in class to be working on their independent study. But as I said, sometimes kids are so curious or passionate about something that they pursue it outside of class as well. And so they're more than welcome to do that as well. There can be a mix of these. It can be either or, but any of these are ways that they can conduct an independent study. This right here that you see is the independent learning cycle. And this works it's very similar to inquiry learning, where students question something, they develop a plan, and part of this plan is how they're going to do this independent study. They find information and they evaluate, is this information important or not? They organize said information, and then they kind of synthesize everything they've gathered into something that they can use into a product. So they're going to take this and create something that's going to show us what they learned. And you could have this product you can suggest products or have some products that are available to them, or you can have them have student choice, which is going to be more powerful probably because then they can find something that also is an extension of that passion. So then they're going to reflect. Have they covered their big question? Have they done everything? So they're kind of looking at the whole process and if they really truly accomplished what they wanted to. And then they communicate to you or to somebody, hopefully an authentic audience, what it is that they learned. And then finally, then you evaluate this and then you have a conversation with the students. Now, when I say evaluate, I don't necessarily mean grade. So when students did my Four Corners projects, I always evaluated them and gave them feedback. I didn't give them a grade, but I wanted them to know that I was looking at what they had done and that I was giving them some feedback that was going to push them possibly to the next level or acknowledge something that they had done that was really well done or to question something maybe that they didn't question because we want to push that thinking and push that learning. So there are lots of advantages for gifted students, and you can see some of them listed here. Obviously, it gives them to be a chance to be creative because they're not doing what is being prescribed for them in the classroom. Hopefully, they have choices anyways in the classroom, but this especially, they're going to have more choice to be creative. And so it also increases motivation because students are pursuing something that they're interested in. And so they're going to be willing to hopefully put more into this. I found that when I did independent studies with students that oftentimes, even though it was not for a grade, they actually worked harder on that than they did on other things because they were just intellectually curious and they wanted to know more. And the school didn't stop them from doing what they wanted to do. It was just something they were interested in. It also teaches students to be more self-directed, which is important. And it teaches really valuable executive functioning skills. You can see right here that independent learning kind of this overall thing, but kids have to plan, and it's part of that planning. What you see there that they're having to manage their time, they're having to prioritize what is important, what is not, and they're going to have to organize themselves. All really valuable executive functioning skills that students can definitely stand to learn. In addition to that, they have to show initiative because they're working independently. I mean, you're there to help them along the way, but you're not there to like chase them with a stick and get them to do their work. They elected into this and they're going to have to show the initiative. And also they're going to have to show the grit to continue on when that excitement dies down and the curiosity is no longer there. Are they going to be pushing through with this? Because that's a very important skill as well. In addition, they'll be using their working memory and their metacognition to reflect upon what they learn. Let me give you an example of how I set up independent study in my science classroom. So in my science classroom, we had 6 units of studies, and for each one of these, we had a pre-assessment. And so the students would take the pre-assessment, and if they got a 92% or higher on the pre-assessment, then I just gave them a grade for that unit of study. So if that unit of study was 3 weeks long or 4 weeks long or whatever, then students could elect to instead do an independent study. And so they would decide on the project. And for this, I did not make it be related to what they tested out of because they already showed they knew it. If they wanted to pursue that, that was great. But it did have to be related to science of some sort. So I had students that were interested in baseball and wanted to learn about the physics of baseball and how to throw a curveball and a slider and how those work. I had several students that learned about roller coasters and how roller coasters work and how can you push the limits of what physics can do with a roller coaster and still be safe. And they would create models of those. I had a student that was really into ornithology and learned all about birds and the evolution of birds and how they came from dinosaurs and why some are flightless and some are not and how they adapt. So there are all sorts of possibilities that students can pursue. And so what would happen then is I would make sure that when I sat down with them, we would set up the structure. And then they would do this. And at the end, I would give them an evaluation. Again, we'd sit down and have a brief conversation about what I saw. And in that conversation, I didn't give them a grade, but I just pushed their thinking a little bit more or acknowledged things they did that they should continue to do. Like I said, it's really important that you have structure when you're doing an independent study. And the three things that really hold this structure in place are the contract, the calendar, and your rubric. So let's talk about each of these and how these work. So you can see this as an example of a couple of different contracts. And so the contract is just a written agreement between the student and you to keep them focused. Sometimes students get so caught up in the project that they might lose sight of what it is they're supposed to be learning. So that's why they're creating learning objectives or learning goals. And whenever you sit down to have that conversation with them, you're always bringing them back to these learning goals. Are you doing this? Have they gotten off on a tangent? If they're off on a tangent, can you get them back where they need to be? But to remind them of what they set out to do in the first place is really important because students get really excited about these. I did this with third graders. I did this with seniors in high school. And students can get really excited and get caught up in this and then lose sight of what it is they're supposed to actually be focusing on. So this is just the means to do that. It also lets the parents know what is going on. So what you don't want to do is get a phone call from a parent or an email from a parent saying, why is my kid doing this and everyone else is doing that? This contract is signed by you, by the student, and by the parents and everyone. So everyone knows what is going on and what the expectations are for this particular project. And you can see it lays out different parts of the project. For example, the skills that are going to be learned, how is this going to be evaluated, and so on and so forth. So the contract is one way to keep them focused. A second way is a calendar. And you can see here, this is just a blank calendar. So I would give this blank calendar to students and I would say, before they even started the project, you have X amount of time. So I want you to plot out what this time is going to look like on this calendar. And this calendar is not a written in stone. This is a pacing guide. So you should be here by this time, but if you're not, you need to say, maybe I needed more time, or maybe I'm goofing off and I need to get back on task. But this is a pacing guide to keep them where they need to be for the project. Now, for my Four Corners projects, I didn't use something like this. They created their own because it was just whenever they had available time. But if it was something where students had an allotted amount of time, I made them plot out what that was going to look like. And they definitely had a deadline. I wanted to make sure that they knew when this is going to be due. So when I sat down with them to have a conference, I would say, pull out your contract. Let's look at that. Pull out your calendar. Let's see where you are. And then we could see if they needed to be. The final piece of this is the rubric. And so you can see this is a blank rubric, but I would give this blank rubric to students before they even started. They had to determine what product they were going to create and how that was going to be evaluated by me. Again, this was not necessarily for a grade. So I have excellent, good, and needs improvement. So they know kind of where they came out in the process. This also acts as a roadmap for them. Okay, this is what I need to produce. This is what I said excellent was going to look like. So this is what I need to make sure I do. Because they're creating the rubric, it makes it so that they have some skin in the game. They know what is going on because they're the ones that created the expectations. If you want to know how to show students how to create a rubric, I do have a Todd talk on rubrics and how students can create these for themselves. But at the very beginning of a project, students had to produce a contract, a calendar filled out, and a completed rubric for me to take a look at. And I would often meet with them. They never made it through in the first draft. I would say, what about this, this, and this? You need to change this. Then they would go back and make changes and bring it back to me. And after 2 or 3 times, typically, then we would have a completed rubric in place, a completed contract in place, a completed calendar in place. I would make copies for myself and I'd keep those, and then they would keep the originals. And I would also make a copy for the parents to sign the one contract. And then students use this as kind of their North Star to guide them along in their project and what they were going to be doing. So that is independent study. And again, this can take all sorts of forms, but no matter what form it takes, structure is definitely key. You need to have something in place, a structure that students understand. So even though it seems like they're kind of doing their own thing, there is a structure underlying that is guiding them along the way.